Hello everybody. Today we're joined by Padraig Murphy from Cubicle 7 to talk about all things Warfrip, that's Warhammer Fantasy Role-Play, for the kids in the audience, and specifically about the enemy within. So, Padraig, it's great to have you on the channel with us.
It's great to be on. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I'll take anybody, especially if they're going to talk Warhammer.
Yes.
I thought it was very exclusive. That's how it was sold to me.
No. Exclusively to everyone. So, before we get lost in this one, you are a producer over at Cubicle 7, specifically working on 4th edition Warfrip.
That's right.
And you're resurrecting and bringing into the new age a whole host of scenarios, supplements, and books that people may have heard about from the mists of time and refreshing them for a new generation. So the big thing that I want to know is, oh my God, how do you go about doing that?
Well, I wake up every morning and then there's the weeping hour. And then after that, I like to get started. No, it's a pleasure and it's extremely exciting. And I love it. So that definitely helps.
Yeah.
There's obviously a lot of graft and hard work and coordination that goes into it as well. And I get asked a lot what my role is. Because it's only one part of a big team. So, you know, we have our in-house writers and artists and line developer, Dave Allen, as well. So people sometimes wonder like what I do. And I mostly describe it as talent wrangling, where I go and find people who are good at these things and get them to do it. And I do a little bit of writing and some other bits and pieces as well, but mainly getting the right people in the right place. And when it came to the enemy within, we were really blessed with who we had to work on that. So Graham Davis, of course, who had a fairly legendary part in the original first edition version, which I'm sure someone correct me, but I think began in 88, around then. No,
it's older than that.
It's older than that. It was late 80s.
I started playing in 87 and it was already out when I started.
Oh,
wow. Yeah. So if it wasn't 87, it might have been even 86 or 85, but yeah.
Wow, yeah.
Late 80s. Sorry. That's, well, I played more second edition than first, I must admit. But yeah, it's The Enemy Within is like a 5-part campaign, I think, as most people are aware. And it was released for first edition. And I think at the time, in particular, was quite revolutionary. It was the famous kind of brief for it was, you know, do me a bloodless Call of Cthulhu adventure in the Empire. And it broke away from a lot of kind of dungeon bashy tropes that were around at the time, and nothing wrong with that. But it kind of took it in a new, more investigatory, more kind of grim and dark and muddy and dark fantasy sort of way. And I think that it did a very good job of it and is much beloved for it. So it's been intimidating to take that on, I can tell you straight away.
Yeah. Can you give us an idea of sort of like the broad strokes of the kind of the story and the narrative that you get with The Enemy Within, and sort of where it goes and where it's placed within the Warhammer world? Because obviously a lot of people know it's in the Empire and stuff, but a little bit more on that. So.
Well, the first 2 sections of it take place in the Reichland. And it begins with a case of mistaken identity. I was fantastic. We brought up the cover. I was afraid I'd been disconnected. Excuse me. It begins with a case of mistaken identity with one of the somewhat spoilery, but I think we can do the very first initiating event, which is you're mistaken. You find a body in a carriage and it looks identical to one of the players. And about it, you find a note indicating that in the blessed and extremely lucky town of Bogenhafen, there might reside a sizable inheritance for you, or rather for the dead man. And you could perhaps take advantage of that by showing up in looking enough like him to claim your inheritance. And that's kind of the instigating event. And that leads you through a perilous investigation to nefarious cults, political entities and corruption that takes you all the way through the Reichland, through fallen or certainly corrupted noble houses, towering castles, and all up and down the rivers of the Reich, and eventually north and out of the Reichland into the city of Middenheim, where once again you're pulled into the activities of a certain cult that you need to investigate, and who seems to have a particular interest in you. and from there you're brought into the Horned Rat, which is the new part 4 of the campaign, which is something that was originally envisaged as being part of the Enemy Within, but it ended up being something else instead, something Rotten and Kislev, which has some real merit to it as well. It was the original part 4, but it was always envisaged it would be something like the Horned Rat. So we worked with Graham to take that original vision and turn it into a whole new section. And that's out now in PDF. So right now you can read all the way up to the Horned Rat. And the final piece, part 5, will be Empire in Ruins, which will be out relatively soon.
What was it like working with not just the original source material, but some of the original creative team that worked on that, and then adapting that into 4th? Because obviously throughout the books, you've got those really nice little director's commentaries and all that kind of thing as well, where they kind of talk about original visions and stuff. But what was the process like for you guys working on it all?
So, well, it was great. Graham Davis done an unbelievable amount of work with that, and he liaised with like a lot of the old heads that he remembered and had contact with from back in the day who had worked on the original versions, and they kind of resurrected between them partly some of the feedback that's happened ever since, and that's what some of those grognard boxes, we call them, kind of address. So they give you like alternative options so that you can put a twist on things for players who know the story already, or
played through it.
Yeah, exactly. Or kind of insights into like, well, a lot of people say they can get lost around here, so here's something that you can do for players to bring them along. So Graham really was responsible for almost all of that and gathering that and putting it together. So that was amazing, and it is. It's interesting because you'll be on a call or you'll read some comment that he's made, and it'll just be like, well, back in the office we were doing this for this reason at the time. And it'll be a nice kind of 30-year-old sort of recollection about why they did something a certain way. And that's fascinating to see, because you don't often get to see the bones of the project, being uncovered, like a bit of archaeology. And then you're kind of setting them up and thinking, well, how do I present this to a modern audience who do have slightly different expectations, I think, of role-playing games these days, and what they're like and what they do for you. So I think we've preserved, particularly in the first 3 parts, like preserved the real core experience and the core, the story, the NPCs, the really compelling parts, and presented the Empire as I think it should be seen as well, as a pretty rough and tumble place, moments of humor, but then, mud and blood spatters again. So it's been great. It's been really interesting. And it's been a challenge, but I think the results are starting to show that it's worked. So that's great.
Was that part of the reason for the companion books? Because originally things like that didn't exist. You got the GM got his book and then he went off on one, dragging the players with him. But the companion books are a supplemental book that is available for each of the actual expansions. So what sort of things go into that? And was it purely because you had the access to the likes of Graham there to add this additional material to help?
Well, certainly we couldn't have done it without him, on a lot of the companion pieces and materials. But I think that they stand on their own merit. It wasn't just that it was accessible. Like part of it is that kind of, like we're calling it the director's cut. And part of that is you need to get in the additional material. So we had access to some bits and pieces that had been cut from the original thing. So there's like a couple of scenes in Death of the Reich, for example, that were set to happen, but cut for one reason or another. And so they're included in the companions. But then something we also got to do with the companion was to expand the campaign, because we know people love it and are quite often quite happy to spend more time traipsing about the halls of power in Middenheim, for example. So it was great to kind of we had 1 or 2 interesting characters that Graham thought this could expand out, what's happening in Middenheim, but let's bring in some new people as well. Let's expand that out. Middenheim is actually a good example with Power Behind the Throne, because one of the kind of things people say about it is that it can be difficult for a very criminal sort of untrustworthy group, party, to get pulled into those events. So something that we were able to do with the companion was give you a couple of extra options for like, here's some extra characters who could cook them in. So that's kind of partially addressed in the core Power Behind the Throne campaign book, and you don't need the companion to play, but if you think you'll enjoy it, the companion is a real no-brainer to pick up, I think.
It's one of the things that I've found very useful with the companion books especially, is that I've been playing a Warhammer Fantasy Role-Play campaign and using elements of stuff to do with the Enemy Within and within that. But then the companions are really great for my games master to just embellish the world a little bit more. And there are a couple of players within that group who aren't as familiar with the Warhammer world as some of us. And so having those companions there and being like, just have a look at this little bit and read through this, and it'll tell you a little bit more about Middenheim or a little bit more about Reichland and Altdorf and all that kind of thing and stuff. It's all very, very cool having that in there to kind of like help people along and add more to the mythology of it all and stuff. So, yeah.
That's great. That's what we wanted to happen. So.
Yeah. See, I looked at it from the point of view that when you hand anybody a linear story, the first thing the players do is go off book. So when you've got a multi-threaded plot like you do within the Enemy Within campaign, because a lot of it isn't linear at all. I just assumed that it was just there because you knew that your character's going to go straight to somewhere entirely different and start getting lost in their own world. And I just thought, well, it's plenty of extra printed material to keep them happy when they're completely missing everything else that's been
it is useful
for them.
Yeah, and we have if you look at the NPCs that we give in the Death and the Right Companion, it kind of has that in mind, because if you look at like what they're doing and the little plot hooks related to them, a lot of them are like, oh, this person actually was recently in town relevant to plot and got something from there, and now they're kind of struggling to know what to do with it. So there's a lot of like little bits and pieces like that, so that if your characters do just take their barge and one float away, you can at least have them run into some people who can leave a gentle signpost that says plot and points back.
I was going to say, talking about the NPCs and stuff, one of the really nice things I've seen in a lot of the books so far has been like the addition of loads of amazing artwork for all of them and sort of bringing them to life. And I think the tomes themselves are really luxurious little items, which I think is, obviously you've got the slightly more tarot-esque versions of them that you can throw in as well, which is quite nice. But then you have the normal versions, as you're seeing here as well, which have that wonderful illustrations throughout it and the maps and stuff.
I know,
look how shiny Ulrich is.
Oh, so lovely. Yeah.
He's so happy there with Blitzspiel.
If only he knew what they were going to do to his country years later.
Yeah. But yeah, it was really nice to see so much of like obviously you've got this incredible writing talent, but there's also an incredible art team that's working with you guys on this as well to bring it all to life and to give that sort of window into the world of, well, the old world as well.
Yeah, we're very lucky with the both the in-house artists we have, because we have 4 staff artists, and we also have a really talented pool of freelancers, and we are very lucky to be working with everybody that we are.
So one of the things that I'd read about when the Enemy Within had been plotted out to begin with, and you were talking about the way that you're going to approach this, was that the sort of like the final 2 elements of the adventure are going to be reworked slightly to approach it from that almost an original vision of it. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and sort of how that's going to play out over these last couple of parts?
Well, obviously, yeah. I mean, how spoilery can we be? How would your audience feel about that?
I would say I would go completely nuts for spoilers because I'm very curious, but I wouldn't be too spoilery because I imagine
no.
And we'll just put a little spoiler warning here.
Yeah, and I will try and be mild
in broad strokes. Yeah.
So I mean So in the original campaign, in Something Rotten in Kislev, you kind of complete the events of Part 3, Power Behind the Throne, and then you are whisked away to Kislev, unsurprisingly, and you kind of have a essentially self-contained adventure there. I think, and then more or less self-contained. And then you return to the Empire, and in your absence, the Empire has descended into, if not outright civil war, then just about. And that brings you into Part 5. Mm-hmm. So I suppose one of the big departures with the Horned Rat is it takes place completely inside the Empire. Mm-hmm. And while it does feature something of a kind of an aside in the sense of you're dealing with something that isn't directly related to the cult activity you've been investigating so far, we do create a lot of ties between the cults and why they're working with this particular foe.
Right.
And how that foe's been using them and how they've been used in turn. So your investigations into kind of, let's say, cleaning up the city of Middenheim from Part 3 leads you to kind of stumbling upon this a very dire plot that you then need to deal with, which I think has a nice self-contained arc of its own, where it starts out like, this seems bad, and then you find some things and you're like, these things are terrible, this is quite bad. And then you figure out the plot and you're like, this is going to make the worst case scenario in Bogenhofen look like a joke. This is very, very bad.
Sounds like Warhammer to me.
Yeah, we need to deal with this immediately. Why are 5 vagabonds wandering through the mountains, the people who this rests upon? But fate is fickle, and that's the way that the gods like to laugh at people. So that kind of gives you part 4. And then when you're brought back to Middenheim, you start to see, well, things are getting bad. But because you've been in the Empire, you've seen a bit of that build up during part 4. And even it's mentioned earlier, that in Power Behind the Throne as well, that things are... There's a kind of a north-south sort of divide happening between Sigmarites and Ulricans, and certainly someone has been fanning that divide and making it worse. So you need to uncover a lot of that. Then I suppose fans of the original will be aware of how Part 5 has gone in different iterations. So it's focused very much on Altdorf, which we've retained. We've kind of kept some ties a little bit more strongly to Middenheim, which I think players would tend to grow attached to during part 3 and 4, or have tended to in our testing, and it seems to be how it goes. And kind of tie that in a little bit more with what happens in 5, and you're more naturally, I think, brought into the slightly higher level negotiations that are happening between nobles and between the emperor and between different people. So it feels to me like a slightly more natural progression, which is not to talk down the earlier editions, which were beloved for a very good reason. But it feels like quite a natural progression, in my opinion. And then we take some of the ideas, and I do stop myself now because we will get spoilery.
Yeah.
So we take some of the original ideas that were explored in Empire in Flames, and we kind of take them and run with them, put them somewhere a little bit different, and move some things around and give you a lot of options for how things could end, and give you... Cool. Yeah. And we try to...
A little bit more of like a GM's toolbox in that regard towards the end of that, to try and give you some different...
Yeah, and in the companion... Yeah, exactly. And in the companion as well, we kind of have if A, B, or C happens, here's more on how that goes. So and then it ranges from very bad to you think it's okay, but it's not, to okay, you've actually done quite a bit. Right. So I think people will find the ending exciting and interesting.
Cool.
And I hope that if you are listening to this and you haven't played it, which the GM has given every permission to have you completely fail the effort of 5 games and 5 campaigns, and for it all to end horribly and in tears and warp fire and demons. So just be aware.
That sounds very Warhammer. So
yeah. Just be aware that success is not guaranteed. So make sure you're turning over all those stones.
As Gerry was telling me earlier, the characters that started off in his campaign didn't get very far in his campaign. So it's all very Warhammer for things to go badly. So.
Yeah, I mean, it is a bit of a party.
Reich was tricky enough. Yeah.
It's a ship of Theseus sort of conundrum. Like, at what point is the party no longer itself? Because there are no surviving members.
That's it.
Yeah.
It's still my grandfather's axe.
Yes, exactly.
The hat is different and the head is different, but it's still that. But it's interesting because for me, although I haven't played through the entire original campaign because we never got the time to finish it, it was almost like Game of Thrones in that it's got a massive fan base. They all go, this is amazing, this is fantastic. There's a lot of political intrigue, fighting when there needs to be fighting. It's not just a hack and slash dungeon crawler. But then that last book never lived up to anybody's expectations. And when second came around, they talked about doing a whole revamp on it. When Hogshead had the license, and then they never got around to publishing that. So people have been making do, or there's been a fan version based on some of the second edition writer's draft that he'd come up with, and that has been the sort of the mainstay, because nobody was ever quite satisfied with, after this dramatic 4-book campaign, and then they get to the 5th book and it's like, that's not how I imagined any of this would happen. So having the option and the opportunity to go back in and not just do a straightforward reprint, essentially being able to go in and tweak and retool things to make it follow a more consistent feel throughout the campaign, I think is an ideal opportunity, and one that, if people have the original sitting on their bookshelf, is probably one that they should definitely pick up, because the Empire in Flames kind of went down in flames a little bit.
I have a lot of sympathy for anyone trying to, and I hope everybody else does too, because my God, I'm in the same position. But anybody trying to finish a 5-part campaign where parts 1 through 4 were considered, good to great.
Yeah.
It's a difficult position to be in. So you won't find me speaking ill of that effort, because I'll only be writing my own warrant, really.
But these things are sent to try us. So they tell me.
But I suppose if nothing else to be pointed out, we'll mention that like part 5 is new. There are not two words together that were side by side before.
Cool. Yeah.
But so it'll be something new and a bit different. And I think it's part remix, part new ideas, and we'll see what people think.
I was going to say, what's been for you one of the funnest moments in the process? Maybe it's a portion of the book that you were particularly taken by, or maybe it was an element of the time you spent doing it. What was one of the funnest times for you involved in the process? Well,
I came on with Cubicle 7 around the time of the Enemy in Shadows Companion. Mm-hmm. So I've been kind of there from like book 2 of, if you're thinking about it, it's a 10-book series. Mm-hmm. So working on Death in the Reich was amazing and tense, and there was a lot of review stuff, and I think it was only the companion of that book where I was like, okay, now I feel relatively confident. So I really enjoyed doing a lot of the NPCs for Death on the Reich, and getting their stories and having them tie back and try and keep the plot as coherent as possible, for parties who were intent on making it not that way. So it was enjoyable to kind of sit there and think, what if they do this? And then roll through it. And I thought of a lot of the gamers I've played with, and one came to mind who I can't name, but I was like, what would he do? Oh, he definitely burned this barn down. Let's see what we can do about that. So that was very, very exciting, because I think it was some of the first kind of novel material I was putting in alongside these authors who I've been reading for decades and love, and that was interesting. But Power Behind the Throne is, and even with the Horned Red Out, and even with Empire in Ruins, as far along as it is, Power Behind the Throne, and working on that and commissioning the art and working with the artists and getting Dave Allen on board around that time as well, I think was when we hit our stride just before Christmas last year. Mm-hmm. And that was tense and a lot of work and stressful at times, but I love that book. And I will stand over it as being, I think, the best version of Power Behind the Throne that has been done.
Awesome.
So I that was just a joy, and it's a joy to run that game as well. It's intimidating at first, but Graham did a great job of reordering a lot of the material in this version. Uh-huh. So you've kept the original stuff, but you've got it in a slightly more kind of like logical way for how GMs would actually use the book.
Right.
Important NPCs and plots all in their own chapters. And working on that was just great. I really feel like I was living in Middenheim for a few months there.
You've fully embraced the wolf cults and their strengths. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And their weaknesses, maybe. But
I don't know what you're... No, I'm not sure what you're talking about.
Are you a werewolf? One thing I was going to ask as well is, obviously, it's been this interesting challenge, you bringing it all this all to life in both PDF form and book form. But obviously, you've moved a selection of this over to sort of like the Foundry virtual tabletop stuff. And what's it been like doing that sort of process and taking it into that more digital realm that obviously over the last year and a bit people have been really embracing because of the pandemic and stuff? Of
course. Great, fantastic. We're also on Roll20, by the way, but we got onto the Foundry first, and therefore we have more materials there. The Foundry is great. They're great. They're a brilliant group to work with, and we were very lucky to have like a hugely passionate fan, Mooman, who's is his handle, and that's what he likes to go by. So Mooman has come on to work with us on even more stuff since the beginning. But it was just amazing to be able to work with him, and he brings so many ideas to us. Like, I really had trouble keeping up with him and what he wanted to do and what he could do. So when he started showing us things, we're just like, this is, amazing, because we are a little bit kind of old school pen and paper people. Yeah. Ultimately, like when I run games online, I just get on, Skype or Hangouts or whatever and do that bit and show a few images. But to see what could be done was amazing. And I know there's some people that live and breathe the VTTs, and that's just how they see gaming. Yeah. So it's been amazing. And it's been great to get all that content going in there. And we want to bring more of our games to the Foundry as well. It's a great platform.
Because what's been quite nice when I sort of tinkered around with it was that it's almost like a lot of the times when it comes to a lot of these online versions of things, it can be a little bit of a hassle trying to load things in and get assets and things. But once the pack just is basically ported into the virtual tabletop setup, effectively it's all just there in a list, and you just open up the things you want, and it's got all the little tokens and sort of things and box outs for the GM to read, and it's got like the maps that you'll need and that kind of stuff as well. So and this was just looking at it from the sort of like the starter set perspective, which was quite nice. Because it was like, oh, wow, I've got all the things that I need in the starter set, and I can use this on my online campaigns with my friends last year and stuff, which was really cool. But yeah, it seems like a very nice intuitive system that they've put together, and obviously very fitting for a lot of people who want to play online. So
no, it's a great system, and I highly encourage anybody to hop on there. Like it really, as we can see now, like, I mean, it is cool. There's all the lines of sight. It resolves all of the SL for you. The character creator is a joy to use. I think I've started using it to do up some NPCs, because it's just, you just add on the careers you want at the right tiers, takes a lot of that, and automates it, and lets you just get into the core, which is like having fun role-playing gaming.
Yeah. So how much of the, I can't remember exactly, but how much of the Enemy Within campaign is available as part of the virtual tabletop at the moment? The Foundry?
I think that we're up to Death on the Reich.
Cool.
And obviously we're going to be doing it all. So
if anyone started it on the Foundry, they're going to be able to continue doing it, which is cool.
Yeah, and we'll be bringing the core books and the companion as well, and we've been kind of combining them into just like, bang, here's everything, go for it. So it'll all be there, and it's a good way to play it and a good way to enjoy it.
The other one thing I was going to ask, and I've asked this of anyone I've talked to when it comes to a role-playing game, is, do you have a favorite character that you've played in Warhammer Fantasy Role-Play, and why is that your favorite character?
I am the forever GM. That's the problem.
What?
In my group.
You're just like me.
Yeah. I GM forever, and I do a few. Like, I had a rat catcher that I really enjoyed.
Everyone loves a rat catcher.
Yeah. Well, I was beloved playing, and I played him for like a little bit back in the secondary school I went to, and then a lot more in college. And he had a good time. And eventually he died because he fell in sewer water and got a disease and died.
Oh no.
Sounds
his own habitat, and he died within it.
Yeah, he'd used up all his fate points surviving against the actual horrors, and then died from an infection, which is pretty woof-up way to go.
As a forever GM, then, is there a particular NPC maybe then that you've controlled that you've always been like, oh, I love their Machiavellian plots, or the way that they dealt with the characters in this?
Okay. Okay, this is big. Well, spoileries as well. I'm all about Power Behind the Throne.
Right. So there's a particular character in that, then, yeah.
The villain was great, and I love when you have a chance to introduce the villain to the characters, and you need to not let them tip them off. And people often think in reverse psychology, like, oh, if I'm meeting the villain, the GM is going to present him as a very nice person, so therefore you keep an eye on who's too nice. And this is, it was a lot of fun to play that particular character. But I also really enjoyed playing Petra Liebkinson, one of the ladies of the court in Power Behind the Throne, who took an interest in one of the PCs and has hounded him ever since. And that was fantastic and very enjoyable as well.
Yeah,
great way to keep your party off balance as well.
Very true. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. Who's the real threat?
Oh no, she's here. There's a lot of fun moments to be had, and that's something that, like, having really detailed NPCs and having all of the important ones have a portrait, I think helps with.
Yeah, I think it's quite one of the nice things about playing NPCs in Warhammer Fantasy Role-Play in particular is the idea that because the world is so morally grey, and maybe you'd say bankrupt as well, you can have a lot of fun with a lot of the NPCs, and so that, and because you present them in such a way that in a normal, maybe high fantasy campaign, you'd be like, well, we need to kill that guy. Whereas in Warhammer Fantasy Role-Play, you're like, maybe we can do a deal with this person. Yeah. And it's fascinating seeing how players interact with that and play around with that almost grim, dark nature of things and stuff. So yeah, it's definitely a joy.
Yeah, that is a nice moment when you've got a criminal gang approaches the players, and I think if you're playing something like some other high fantasy game, you tend not to want to bribe them and not to want to put up with them. You're like, no, we'll fight these people, it's an encounter.
Yeah.
But when you meet them in Warhammer Fantasy Role-Play, it's in the back of your head, I think, always, that if someone gets a bad critical on you, you could lose, something, if permanent stat, effectively.
My arm comes up in this.
Yes, exactly. So you kind of do think it's like, look, I have some silver, let's just get this done. Here you go, the eel. Just take the silver and let us go. Which is nice.
Even victory in a fight comes with psychological cost sometimes.
Exactly.
You're not just regular murder hobos in Warfrip, which I think is one of the defining features of it. You can't just walk into a town and start lopping off limbs left, right, and centre, having never done it before, without suffering painfully for it. And it is the gritty realism that brings it all home to the players as well. The first time they try that in a town, and then spend the next couple of weeks without any sleep because of it. So.
I have a nice write-up on Crime and Punishment that Graham did that we cut, because even despite the companion and the thousands of pages, there still wasn't room for everything. It will appear at some point, but it does have a nice, here is how bad it gets for you if the watch catch up with you, and it's obviously quite, it's grim. But
on that note, then, the Empire in Ruins is being worked on, and will be the last of the Enemy Within campaign then. Are you already looking with one eye to the future and going, well, we're going to work on this next, or is there already stuff being developed for post?
Yeah, we've quite a few things in development. So Empire in Ruins is finished writing, and it's completely written and looks good. So that's gone into layout now, and then there'll be a bunch of review processes, but that's where that is. So that has given us a little breathing room to go, that's happening. What's next? So we have a few things in process at the moment, one of which is a big book of magic that I know people are dying for.
Cool.
The other one is a book called Up in Arms, which is some new kind of military themed careers, so slightly fightier careers. A little bit of a write-up on the Cult of Myrmidia, which is a bit of fun because I don't think we've had that before in serious detail. And we've got some. It's also kind of like the armory book. So there's a ton of new weapons choices in there, because it's been a few years since the core came out. We've only had a few new weapons here and there in books like Archives. So I think that'll be a nice book basically to get. So it's much more player focused than a lot of what we've done.
Right.
It's options for your character basically. And then I've just finished the write-up of the next 10 books, summary wise. That we need to go through the various processes. So I mean, in broad strokes, there'll be at least one more city book for the Empire, and then we will be getting out of the Empire for a while.
Interesting.
So
only one remaining opportunity for me to get an Empire War Wagon.
I've actually spoken to someone about the War Wagon book, the book of wagons, and this might be too inside baseball, but if you take a look at one of the wagon that is at the end of Power Behind the Throne, some of the layers in that can be kind of removed and moved around, so that I can get reused out of the art for a supplement.
One of my very first characters was a cart driver, simply because the minute we got the chance, we built ourselves our own ham-fisted bargain basement board wagon, and you needed somebody who was able to drive a cart just to get it from A to B.
I think that's needed. I think it needs to have all the options that we have for barges and this and the right companion. So I think you need firing slots and things that hop up, and rules on how to explain, and some notes on how to explain all this to road wardens who stop you going, what are you driving? Where are you invading? So that would be fun. But the next focus would be to get out of the Empire, and to expand on some of the species we haven't seen a whole lot of. So,
great stuff. Yeah.
Sounds fantastic. So if people are interested, they can go over and pick up the fourth book and the compendium right now on PDF, and they can pre-order hard copies.
If you go and pre-order your hard copy from cubicle7games.com right now, you will get the PDF immediately of the Horned Rat. You'll get the companion when it's out, which is relatively soon. And then that will be delivered in print towards the end of the year, basically. I think Q4. That's the website, and it'll have more accurate information than I remember off the top of my head. Physical copy sent Q4. There we are. So that will go to you. And again, you have the option to pick up the collector's edition, which is very nice. It doesn't quite come true there, but all that white is actually silver foil. So that's quite nice. I do love them, and they have their nice kind of like edging in different colors and
very
marks.
Nice.
And so I think the collector's edition, they come in a nice slipcase, the pair of them. I think they're a worthy pickup.
Definitely. I think anybody who enjoys playing in the old world definitely should consider going for the most elaborate types they can to really show off to all of their players just how much they care for it and just how much they will be appalled when the players ruin it for them.
Yeah. There would be quite a flex though in dropping the 10 books on the desk and going, this is our lives for the next year.
Yeah. We will play this.
Yes.
You expecting everybody to go furlough again? Nobody's going to work. You're staying at home until
this is it. Yeah.
This is what you do now. Well, it's been an absolute joy to talk to you, Padraig. We will hopefully do this again. If people have any questions about Cubicle 7's workshop, drop them below. We'll pass them along and get them answered. And we shall speak to you again soon.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on. It's been a pleasure. And I do love to talk about Warhammer. So, if it ever
we'll do this again.
Yeah. If it becomes less exclusive and you can afford to have someone back twice, I'd be happy to be
dragged back. We've not managed it yet. All right. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Go ahead and check out our other content on screen now. And while you're at it, why not hit subscribe and remember to ding our dong. Go on, you know you want to click it. Go on.